Bonjour, Kinamagan in Ireland, Adishnikas, and welcome to today's reading lesson. Today's lesson, Drawing Inferences, Day 1. Drawing inferences requires a knowledge of the text and background knowledge from all of the other texts and experiences that we have in our life. If we see a glowing stovetop, we can infer that it's hot because we've had experiences. We've seen it cook things. If the sun is out, we can infer that uh, that we might get a sunburn from previous experiences. If there's white stuff falling from the sky and we don't live by Vesuvius, we can infer that it's probably snowing because we have that background knowledge. When drawing inferences from texts such as these, you're going to want to at least have a knowledge of what you're looking for. And in today's day 1 video, you're going to fill out the packet versus filling out a Google form. Day 2's Google form will be graded. So let's look at what we're looking for in our first article about Albert Einstein. We're going to look at is there is a relationship between science and creativity. That's a true or false. They're all true or false. So that's what we need to know. We need to know if there's a relationship between science and creativity. If you don't do well in school, you won't do well in life. The things people are interested in when they are kids are seldom the same things they will remain interested in as adults. The world eventually recognizes good ideas, or in order for new ideas to take hold, compelling evidence must be presented. So we're going to want to read it and see what the text says about it. Albert Einstein is probably the most famous scientist that ever lived. His work changed our understanding how things in nature, like light, gravity, and time, behave. Einstein was the first scientist to provide compelling evidence that atoms and molecules exist. He showed that light can behave as both a wave and a particle, called the photovoltaic effect. He proved that for people traveling at extremely high speeds, time passes more slowly than for people moving slowly. He discovered that the now famous equation E equals mc squared, which means that energy and matter can be converted into one another. And he rewrote the laws of gravity, which had been unchallenged by scientists for hundreds of years. Einstein was born in Germany. He was a quiet boy who was interested in nature and who showed an early inclination towards math and physics. He valued creativity and didn't really like the rigidity of school. Though he graduated from both high school and college. He was not taught to be a good student and was not recommended for any jobs by his teachers. Nonetheless, he got a job at the patent office in 1902, and in 1903 he got married. He had 2 sons by this marriage, but later divorced, and many years later married someone else. Most of Einstein's famous scientific discoveries were made while he was working at the patent office. 1905 was a very big year for him. He was awarded a PhD by the University of Zurich. He also published 4 very important scientific papers on his work with Brownian motion, that atoms and molecules really do exist, the equivalence of mass and energy, the photovoltaic effect, and his theory on special relativity. Einstein was only 26 years old. His papers were widely read in the scientific community, and his ideas were gradually accepted. Einstein began to get the reputation of being a genius. He began to lecture at the University of Bern and was able to resign from the patent office. He became a professor of physics at Karl Ferdinand University in Prague and then took a professorship in Zurich. His paper on the general theory of relativity was published in 1915 and described, among other things, how gravity distorts space and time. In 1919, a newspaper headline in London read, Revolution in Science, New Theory of the Universe, Newtonian Ideas Overthrown. Einstein received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921 for his overall contribution to theoretical physics and for the discovery of the photovoltaic effect in 1905. He was also awarded several other medals for scientific achievement, and universities worldwide competed to award him honorary doctorate degrees. Einstein had become a celebrity. Einstein was living in America when Hitler rose to power in Germany. Because he had been born Jewish, returning to Germany was out of the question, and Einstein renounced his German citizenship. He became increasingly interested in politics and the state of the world in later life. So let's think here, true or false? There is a relationship between science and creativity. What do you think? In my head, once you've written this down, in my head, I would probably say true. Science is consistently looking for creative solutions to a problem. If we're not creative, we're likely to just go with what's already there. And well, that's not really science. That's just copying. It's plagiarism. Number two, true or false. If you don't do well in school, you won't do well in life. Write your thought, the answer you think it is. Me personally, I'd go with false. Einstein was not a great student, but his resume is quite extensive. He has a statue literally on the just off the National Mall. Check it out; it's pretty cool. Get a big lap. Uh, some of us are later bloomers, and some of us need that maturity to say, "Okay, this is how I, needed to be a student." But being a great student and doing well in life aren't always intertwined. Shh, don't tell your teachers, because I'm going to tell you that if you do well in school, you'll do well in life. Probably not 100% accurate. True or false, things people are interested in when they are kids are seldom the same things they will remain interested in as adults. This one, I could see an argument both ways. I personally was interested in sports as a kid, and I'm still interested in sports now that I'm a big kid. But at the same time, I played with He-Man and Voltron stuff when I was a kid. Not so much interested in that anymore. Number four, true or false, the world eventually recognizes good ideas. You put true or false, what you think. And I would probably say true with a weakness on this true. Um, some good ideas are not seen for a very, very long time, and some are noticed instantaneously. Chances, the stuff that Einstein, his knowledge, took a little bit of time before it got out there. But as you saw in the story, he went from couldn't get a job in education right out of school to schools literally tripping over themselves to award him doctorates. So I would say true. Number five, in order for new ideas to take hold, compelling evidence must be presented. And this is, go ahead and put your answer before I speak. And this is true for the most part. Sometimes with social media, um, compelling evidence is kind of subjective. But generally, to overturn Newtonian ideas, you were going to need to be something big. I mean, we still know who Newton is to this day, and he passed on hundreds of years ago. All right, so let's go to the second one. Speaking of science, Charles Darwin. Let's look at the questions. What scientific skills did Darwin use? Why do you think Darwin made friends with the professors of botany and geology? What do you think survival of the fittest means? And when it comes to deciding on a career, what can you learn from Darwin's experience? So having an idea of what I'm looking for as I read is helpful when you're taking a test or doing homework or whatever. So let's read the article and answer the questions. Charles Darwin had one of the most revolutionary ideas ever in science, the theory of evolution. Before the publication of Darwin's The Origin of Species by Natural Selection, people believed that every species on Earth had always been there and had never changed in form. But Darwin showed that all living creatures on Earth are descended from common ancestors and are still evolving today. Charles Darwin was born in England, and for most of his childhood, he was raised by his oldest sister. As a boy, Darwin loved to collect insects and rocks and to experiment with them. He originally planned to become a doctor, but soon discovered that he didn't have the temperament for it. There was no such thing as anesthesia then, so surgeries were done while the patient was still awake. Darwin left medical school feeling like a failure. He then turned to the study of theology, but he remained more interested in beetles than in his studies, and barely earned his degree, though he did make some friends, notably the professors of botany and geology. In 1831, he was hired as a naturalist to join a scientific expedition that was traveling around the world on a ship called the HMBS Beagle. Darwin's friends from Cambridge recommended him, and he spent the next 5 years traveling the world, collecting the bones of extinct animals. In the Galapagos Islands, he noticed that the same animals did not look exactly the same on the different islands. These observations eventually led to his ideas on evolution. He published a collaborative report on evolution in 1858 with another naturalist, Alfred Russel Wallace, who had made similar observations as Darwin. Darwin's famous book, The Origin of Species by Natural Selection, was published in 1859. It was in this book that Darwin made the observation that we know as survival of the fittest. While his book made him famous, it was also very controversial, as some people believed it conflicted with religious views on the creation of the world. Darwin wrote several other books, one of which, The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, showed that man could use selective breeding to create different breeds of pigeons, dogs, and even some plants. Darwin died when he was 74. He had 10 children, and of the 7 who survived him, 4 became prominent scientists in their own right. So, what scientific skills did Darwin use? Well, if we look back, we know that he made observations. So, observation's a pretty big skill there. So, that's what I would write. Go ahead and write that in. Number 2, why do you think Darwin made friends with the professors of botany and geology? And keep in mind at this point, it's in a section talking about him studying theology, which is essentially religion. What does that tell us of who he became friends with? That he didn't become friends with the theology professor, but one's related to botany and geology. So write down what you think. I would probably put something along the lines of he was still interested in the natural world. What do you think survival of the fittest means? Well, let's look at the words in the sentence. Survival, so to keep living. The fittest. So those things that are most fit survive. But now are we talking about health, like who can run the longest? Or are we talking who is the best fit for their environment? What do you think it means? Go ahead and write what you think, and I'll give you a moment. All right. And number 4, when it comes to deciding on a career, what can you learn from Darwin's experience? Well, this is going to be another opinion, and we know from career that he went into one occupation, it wasn't for him, tried another, still wasn't for him, went to a third, became world famous, where we still know his name today. What lesson is that? So you put a lesson that you think it means, and then make sure your name's on it and turn it in the bin. If you're in person, you should find a time to show it to me using Zoom, and I'll be happy to grade it. At this point, I will end the video. Make sure you turn your things in. Have a minute, gives you got. Meanwhile, bum a pee.